It was a difficult conversation with the client for sure because it felt like they weren't aware of neglecting the communication issues. In the end, it was very simple. We ended the contract, we parted ways, we sent all our work. It wasn't just the delays in communication, it was also not respecting our process.
Hello and welcome to episode 114 of Webflail. That's a nice number, isn't it? 114. I'm your host, Jack, your failure connoisseur, and today we have the creative powerhouse that is Maria Manila. Now, 4 years ago, she started Higher Ground Studio with Armando, her partner, and they've been creating high performing marketing websites for businesses that are preparing to launch, seeking a refresh, or ready to expand. Now, I was looking at their website. They've got some beautiful work. If you guys want to check that out while you're listening, that is highergroundstudio.ca. Ooh, little intro domain name there. And there was a really nice testimonial that I'm going to read. Maria and Armando were able to take our ideas and turn them into comprehensive vision for a clean and modern website to elevate Truebuild's online presence and brand in an authentic way. The entire process was collaborative, timely, and organized, and it was clear that they went above and beyond throughout every step. That is higher ground. So go check it out there, guys. It is clean, nice work, working with all sorts of different brands, but doing it in an authentic way every single time. Now, enough of the good stuff. How did she get to where she is today? We're going to explore failure number 1, not collaborating with more partners earlier. Failure number 2, neglecting to work on herself and her skills. And 3, being too flexible with clients. Maria, welcome to the Webflail podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jack.
And how do you feel hearing all of that stuff? You must be like, God damn it, I'm amazing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a really great intro and really excited to dive into all the failures and mistakes that I want to talk about today. But yeah, thanks for an amazing intro. It just made me realize, oh my gosh, we've done so much in the past 4 years. And of course, we're just getting started. And I love the testimonial that you called out from Truebuild. They're an amazing client amongst a lot of other clients. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And thanks so much for being here. It's epic. But first of all, we must ask you an incredibly important question. What is your relationship with failure?
So my relationship with failure, it's definitely an ongoing battle, I'd say, because failure to me is constant learning and a lot of testing your mental capacity every day and always accepting a lot of the fact that there's always room for growth and every day is not always going to go as planned, and that's okay. Just constantly reminding yourself that and reflecting on your journey. So every day is not going to go well, but you can always try again tomorrow. So that's a small recap of my relationship with failure. I tend to be very hard on myself because I have a type A personality. So when things go south, I take it the hard way. But again, always reminding yourself that it's part of the journey and you've come so far.
I think this is a common thing among all these different successful web flowers that I've talked to. They're like, basically, you feel everything because you're quite a sensitive person. I think generally creative people are. They feel vividly emotions and the world. And I think that really brings out your best work, that like sensibility to feeling everything. And on the flip side of that, though, when stuff doesn't quite go right, or there's, miscommunication, or you don't maybe interpret someone's words and turn them into visuals in the way that person had imagined, and they're paying you, and you're like, how much do I want to push back? But you're like, it's like you feel that same weight that you do when things go well. It's like a superpower that also is like your biggest downfall, maybe as well. Do you resonate with that?
Yeah, I'd say you put a lot of pressure on yourself. Just constantly working on that every day is a struggle at times. I know for a lot of the projects that didn't go well, it's hard to bounce back from that at times. And just, yeah, like you said, just having a lot of, just going through a lot of the emotions and feelings throughout the process. It's like at the same time, you feel that things can things shouldn't be going this way, but in fact it's part of what you need to go through in order to grow. So that definitely resonates with me when we talk about failure a lot.
And how does that work with Armando? Because I guess both of you working together, do you have different personality types? If you're like, oh my God, like we've messed up, like this is the end of us, like what is Higher Ground Studio going to look like after this setback? And he's, yeah, shut up. We can do this. Like, what is your relationship like there?
Yeah, it's, let me just say, working with your partner, it's a great way to develop your relationship as partners and also as business owners. But because it's also our first time, both of our first time running a business, and we always accept that neither of us are right. For example, if I have one opinion and he has a different opinion, it's sometimes challenging to come to a consensus or have one agreement where, okay, so who's right in this case? Talking things out really allows us to collaborate better. And collaborating with Armando, I think a lot of people may feel that working with your partner is challenging, but sometimes you also need that different opinion to make your perspective open up, and so that you're open to different ideas as well. Because if we were thinking the same way, the same opinions, then you could look at that as maybe it could hinder your growth as business owners as well.
Yeah, sometimes you need that, yeah, like salt and pepper chicken. You need that friction, right? Chili
Yeah, for
chocolate.
sure.
What other good combos are there? I don't know. Hot and cold. It's not, I guess that's the old classic. But yeah, you need that, yeah, that difference to contradict what you've said, or like at least refocus what you've said and work out whether it's actually true or not. And I guess 4 years in this business together, that is a long time. How do you guys think, if you were to speak to Maria at the start of her higher ground studio journey, what advice would you give her about working with a partner and making sure that you were in the best place to grow what you were going to grow? What would you say to you? You're next to young Maria now, 4 years ago at the start of this whole thing. What would you say to her?
I would say be patient and resilient through the most challenging projects, and that you'll always find a way to work things out. There will definitely be days where you're going to doubt yourself and not see how you're gonna see the light in the end, but just trust the process and understand that you're not always going to have the answers in the beginning, but eventually you will, or you can work on it. And that it's paramount to just accept that it's, you're working on it, and eventually you're going to have a collaboration where you're going to find a way to work better together.
Completely. That's inspirational advice for anyone that's starting a studio. It's so difficult to start a studio. I actually tried to do
For
that earlier
sure.
this year and I
Oh, did
failed
you?
fantastically. Yes, I was not up to the task. I basically realized I wanted to be a freelancer rather than a studio founder. But speaking of that, how do you guys Did you guys were you guys like our aim is to grow a $1 million a year studio, or how did you like? Weren't you both just freelancers individually, or what were you like? Okay, let's do this thing together and let's make a studio.
Yeah, interesting question. I guess when Armando and I decided to start our ground studio together, we had this vision of traveling the world and working together. And before Higher Ground Studio, we actually came from a background in hospitality. So previously, we did have experience working together. We used to work on a cruise ship. So we were
Oh wow!
managing a bar. Yeah, it was a really amazing experience. So we were managing a bar together. So we had an idea of how to work together very well. And we thought, hey, we worked so well together. Let's just see how it goes. And I think that's just how things started with us. We didn't know if it was meant to be to start a business together, or maybe if it was better if we started our own separate businesses. But when our first client happened to be a mutual friend of ours, the project was so much fun. And thankfully, we had a really great client that we just wanted to keep going. And with many more clients to follow after that, they just loved that we were a couple and building a business together. So anyway, our vision together when starting the business was to just grow together, whether it's in business life, personal life, and being able to experience everything at the same time. I think, interestingly enough, Armando and I had always wanted to start a business, actually, whether it's something completely different in different industries or not. So it was just something we were very open to exploring together.
And you're still doing it now. You're still together. It's a beautiful thing. I think starting a business with your partner may be the hardest thing and put tons of pressure on your relationship, or it might be something that
Mm-hmm.
brings you together because of that same pressure. As we know,
Mm-hmm.
diamonds are made under pressure. Okay, we have talked a little bit about how you guys came to create this studio, how the studio's grown. You've done multiple projects together now. 4 years later, you're still growing the studio, and it's pretty exciting. I think you guys have got something amazing together, and that's actually not that common among studio founders that I've met. They often hate each other. But yeah, this isn't all sunshine and roses. We need to
No,
get
definitely not.
into the failures and understand what went wrong along the way so that you became the success that you are today. So, tell me about failure number one, not collaborating with more partners earlier.
Yeah, so I find that we didn't realize in the beginning that collaborating with more partners would actually help us create more better work together or create more value for our clients. But even just beyond that, we also lost a few amazing projects just because we were so restricted to only being web design and Webflow Studio. And what I mean by that is, let's say a client was looking for a copywriter. Armando and I always struggled to understand how are we going to embed a copywriter into our process. I don't do copywriting, but the client needs one. How do we incorporate illustrations to this? And so, of course, it was much more easier for the client in that case to go with a vendor or a larger agency, let's say, who had it all. And so not exploring collaborating with more partners for us, it kind of put us in a position where we felt like we weren't really growing as a studio because we didn't know how to work with other people. We didn't understand the processes, and we lost a lot of opportunities that we really wanted to win because we just felt very limited to our capabilities. But even aside from just like winning projects, I think once we started partnering with other agencies and, let's say, like SEO experts, that open other ways for us to learn about their domain. So for example, learning more about like conversion copywriting, SEO, like how that's tied to Armando's work. And the reason why I say those were like mistakes is because we want to add more value to our clients' work, and we felt like we were always too narrow-minded on specializing in our own skills.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because I think at the start of your journey as an agency, you don't necessarily have projects that are that big, right? If you get a 5K project, say, for some of your first projects might be around that kind of price point. You're not too sure how to price. You're not too sure of what your skill sets even are. You're not too sure what your processes are. You're trying to work it all out. And then the thought of like outsourcing is quite scary. I think it's okay. I'm going to find some guy or girl on Fiverr or Upwork because maybe you don't have the network yet. And you're like, I'm going to entrust them to do something I don't know how to do. I don't even know how to hire for that. I'm just going to trust them that they're going to level up this project massively and hope for the best. Like it feels like quite high risk. So what advice would you give to someone who is, yeah, Maria, I get that I want to like collaborate with partners, but how does that even work? Like, how would I go about that?
It's hard. And I think that's really what we struggled with in the beginning too. How do we price this? How do we know this person is going to do great work? And after speaking with a few other founders who were in my same position, most of them have told me you just have to embrace that it's not going to go well, and that's okay. And so their advice and how I would approach it is, I think just being as transparent as possible to the clients really helps a lot. And I think that's also the one of the core values that we really embrace as a studio. So I know that we're working with some people or hearing from others that sometimes you have to lie your way into winning a project, but that never felt right to us as a studio. I think on that note, it would just be being transparent about our just capabilities as a studio and finding the right fit. And maybe if it'll take longer, it's fine. But again, there will always be a moment where everything will feel more aligned.
And I noticed on your website you have capabilities with web design, webflow development, third-party integrations, yada yada. But also in the section above, you say can't find what you're looking for. We also work with partners who are specialized in the following areas: copywriting, branding, video editing. And I think it's interesting that you have said, look, we don't do everything for everyone, but here's what we do really well. And here's who we can partner with, trusted partners that we have worked with and know that they are who they say they are and can do what you need as a client. And I think that approach seems to be a good balance between, look, we can't learn everything. We can't be video editors and website developers and website designers and SEO experts. Like you, of course not. And that's actually going to devalue your offering to a client. If you say, yeah, I'm an expert in everything, mate. Yeah, smells like BS, right? So, but then having a partner or a group of partners that you're like, you're the really good at video editing because you're a video editor. That's what you do 12 hours a day or 8 hours a day or whatever. You know, you're an SEO expert. We're going to hire you when we need you for projects. That seems like a far better approach. So is that how you might advise someone who's, hey, I don't want to offer everything, but I also am losing projects because I'm not offering this, that, and the other?
Yeah, mentioning to our potential clients and existing clients in general, it's such a huge advantage for us to say, look, we're specialized in web design, marketing websites, and webflow. If you need a copywriter, we do have partners for that, branding, SEO. And I think this year is probably our best year yet because we've collaborated with more agencies. And even having strategic partners like partnering with an SEO expert, we're able to leverage our partnership with him. He loves working with us. We love working with him. And it's also a way for our clients to see that they can depend on us as a studio to have these specialized services, and that we're not just generalist. I know there's probably a huge topic about, oh, a generalist versus a specialist and whatnot, but some clients, they really appreciate the transparency and what you do well and what you do best in, and having a reliable network or list of partners that you can refer to because they trust you as well. So that's how we've been approaching it.
Yeah, interesting. You're talking about how there's a conversation about being a generalist versus a specialist. I actually did a tweet about this recently, and I wrote that I've recently found that doing development work, just development work, is a lot more lucrative than offering design and development as a freelancer. When the design is done, you can just get straight into it. Less back and forth with the client and more just go with development. Anyone else experienced this? Any thoughts? And loads of people commented, which is really fascinating to hear both sides, because, for example, Ethan Suero, a Spanish designer based in Manchester, he put, I do both, and that's one of the things clients love, as they only need to communicate with one guy for the entire process. I'd say development is more straightforward, as it is just build this without much back and forth, but definitely doing both is more lucrative in my opinion. Other people said the complete opposite. I'm not sure if there is a definitive answer to this, but maybe the point is you need to work out what's best for you, and potentially if there is a tangential skill that you can upsell your client or do really well that doesn't require too much extra effort, then potentially that makes sense. But in my experience, just picking a thing you want to be known for is quite a strong strategy.
I agree. Honestly, on that note, my take on that is do what works best for you. I know so many friends of mine who do video editing, branding, websites, development, everything more. It's great, but personally for me, it's not for me. When I started my freelance journey, this was actually like almost 10 years ago, and then before I took a break, I was I was a graphic designer. I did a lot of social media posts, and I also did branding as well. And when we started Higher Ground Studio, we were also offering branding. But then eventually I decided that no, I enjoy focusing more on websites, user experience than doing branding. I would rather pass that work on to someone who enjoys it more and is more passionate about it than I am. And maybe there are people out there, there are designers out there that both love branding and websites. So yeah, like you said, really what's best for you. There's nothing wrong to keep doing that.
Exactly. I agree. I think you need to work out what's best for you. In the kind of what I've come to think is that essentially, as you're starting out as a freelancer, try a load of different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily try a load of different stuff for clients. I think it might be great to try a load of different conceptual projects where you test out your animation skills, you test out your 3D skills, you test out copywriting or whatever you're interested in, and just do conceptual projects. And then you can find which areas you really want to play in. And it's like going to Thorpe Park or something, or like a fairground, theme park. You go, there's like loads of different rides to go on. And they're all fun, but you might need to work out like, hey, I actually really love the Vortex Inferno, and I'm going to go on
Yeah,
that like 10
exactly.
times
Mm-hmm.
because that's the one that I really want to spend my time on. And then you get really good at going on that ride and knowing what are the ups and downs of it, and how best to not throw up on that ride. But yeah, that's my take on that. Tell me about failure number 2, neglecting to work on yourself and your skills.
Yeah. So early in my career, I just was focusing a lot on client work. And maybe a lot of people can relate to this because you feel like you're on a high. Okay, I'm closing deals left and center. But one thing I didn't realize was that if I'm not working on marketing or if I'm not working on my skills, what happens when I finish these projects? I'm left with no clients, or maybe there's a gap in my skill that I really wanted to learn, but I wasn't able to offer. And so, apart from skills, like even neglecting to work on myself, let's not even talk about work related things. I feel like maybe I just firmly believe that maybe this is the year, this is one of our best years yet, because Armando and I have been prioritizing our health and fitness journey a lot more. I started picking up running again, and I just felt a lot more focused and productive at work. So everything is all tied together. And I wish I prioritized that even more earlier in my career. But of course, these are things that you don't know until you start something new,
Until you
and
know.
you keep
Yeah.
exactly, and then you just keep going, and then you're like a light bulb lights up, and you go, "Hey, maybe this is why things are going so well." Working on my skills, it's things like, for example, I just feel so passionate about analytics and just driving more conversions for our clients, and so I wish I put more time aside from that. I think that all comes down to time management, right? But not neglecting on my skills. I feel like you start to hit a plateau in your career. And I'll admit some projects, it just felt eventually repetitive and it didn't feel that exciting to me anymore. And so I was craving something new. And again, well, tying into working on your skills, I think would continue to work to continue to make work feel a lot more exciting and interesting.
Holy smokes, you're speaking my language. You're speaking my language, Maria. Yeah, I agree. I think, okay, so I think this is a bit like being a chef. Chefs, when they finish their shift, so they make all these incredible meals and they're like dabbing the plate and doing that thing where they spin it round. And then they get
Mhm.
out of chefing, right? They go home at the end of the night, they clean up the kitchen, shut everything, lock everything up. They go home at the end of the night, they get a cheeseburger on the way because that's they just can't be asked because they've cooked for everyone else apart from themselves. Just get a takeaway or whatever. I used to work in kitchens before I got fired, but basically those guys, they had their diets were disgusting, and it's because they were cooking. They knew so much about food, but they literally had nothing left to give themselves. And I think vice versa, if you're not focusing on your own creative projects just for you, that you don't even need to show anyone. Like you need to make time for that in order to develop
Mhm.
different skills in your area. Because otherwise, you're just in grind mode, emailing and doing these changes and make the logo bigger and all that bullshit. You need to also make time for you creatively to just express yourself and play and have fun because that is ultimately why you got into this whole business in the first place. Probably it's probably because you love
Exactly.
Lego and you like building stuff and you like colors and you like shapes. And then vice versa, though, on the other side of that, making time for yourself isn't just in the creative sphere, it's also in running or like cooking or painting or pottery or I've started a tag rugby team recently and it's made my work so much better.
Right?
Why? Because it's nothing to do with work. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I've got energy for my work because I'm not, working on Tuesday evenings like I probably used to. I literally can't focus on, I don't know, replying to that email about making the logo bigger because I'm trying to score a try over here. I'm trying to whip it
Right?
to
And
Ed to go through the gap.
it sounds so counterintuitive, but it's so necessary. And one of my biggest fears, actually, and tying into failures, was when I decided to get back into designing. Earlier, I mentioned how I started this journey like almost 10 years ago. I didn't really take designing seriously, honestly. It was just some hobby that I enjoyed on the side. And if a friend or connection wanted me to do their branding or design some social media posts, I felt so excited. I would be staying up until like 3 in the morning because it was just so exciting to me. And what I feared with starting the studio actually was, what if I do so much of this that I start to lose my passion? So I think it's really important to take a break, necessary breaks, and work on skills that aren't so serious, essentially, as to really spark that passion again.
Yeah, be a little bit silly. Do the unconventional to do the conventional. I completely agree with everything you
Hmm.
say. Okay. If someone is like, but Maria, I'm trying to build a studio here. I'm trying to bust a gut. Like, I need to work hard. I'm working at my desk while eating. I'm sleeping on my desk. I'm doing, there's people that are like, no, you need to grind, Maria. What are you telling me this for? This isn't what I need to hear right now. What would you say to the kind of hustle bros that seem to be on every single YouTube ad I ever see?
I think they're not really telling the truth, and obviously that eventually leads to burnout. That's clearly something I've experienced. Of course, that was and earlier in your career too. If you're just starting out with freelancing, it's feast or famine, right? So I do get that point where you need to prioritize like paying your bills and such, but it's all part of your growth. And sometimes it helps talking to other people about it. And if that's their opinion, all right, I think it just, again, circles back to keep doing what works for you, unless one day then you may realize you needed all those nights where you had to constantly grind and grind, and you realize that you're actually missing out on life. And so I do feel that is what I experienced in the past. And it took me maybe over 2 or 3 years. Again, I mentioned how this is our best year ever, probably because I am now at a point where I'm able to create more time for myself and enjoy things that are outside of work instead of constantly grinding every single day.
Love that. Yeah. I think I've heard this quite a few times on the podcast, but one of people's biggest failures is either overworking or very much linked to that, not looking after their physical and mental health. And ultimately, like you are the business. Like as a freelancer,
Yeah.
it's you. Like you are the one doing the work. You're the one replying to the emails. You're the ones putting the social media posts out there. Like you need to look after your health in order to keep doing that. And that means having more balance in your life, going to the gym, going for runs, hanging out with friends, just looking after your mental health, having community. Like as much as you do need to work hard, and I'm not trying to suggest that you should just sit back and do fuck all. That's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're both in agreement though that like uh, to do this long term, you need more balance than probably you're giving yourself. And I found this with Webflow. Like I'm stopping Webflow at the end of this year, and it's hard to
For
feel
sure.
or to give yourself the space to listen to your body and your mind. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this feels very personal to me, this failure that you've brought up here today as well. I appreciate you talking about it today.
Yeah, and exactly. I know we were talking earlier before we started the podcast about you unfortunately ending Webflow, but again, it's all part of the journey, and you had to experience it at some point to realize maybe this is just not the path for me, which is fine. I even mentioned that who knows, maybe Webflow is not always gonna be there for us. Maybe there's something new that just reignites like more passion to either me or Armando or who really knows like down the road. But neglecting to work on yourself and just having that goal of creating more balance for yourself between life and work is only gonna make your business actually perform much better. And again, as counterintuitive as it is, I know it's hard to just switch off. Armando does such a much better job at, okay, babe, I'm not working right
Compartmentalizing
now.
almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm done with work. You can keep working. And I'm like, all right, I do my best to shut it off. Sometimes it's really hard, but again, it's a work in progress for sure.
Yeah. But I think you learn after you do reach burnout. Like, as much as all of these
Exactly.
failures that people probably listen to are, I wonder how much people are like, yeah, I'm actively going to change my lifestyle off the back of agreeing with Maria talking about this stuff. Like, yeah, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to sign up to the gym and go every other day or whatever. Maybe it's just, hey, maybe this is a little reminder to think about this and take action as you see fit if any of this stuff resonates with you. Tell me about failure number 3, being too flexible with clients.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Being too flexible with clients. I want to say I feel a little passionate about this last topic or this third topic here because although this year, I think what I want to say is we also had our worst project happen this year. And it's because of being too flexible with a client. We ended up doing a full refund. It was 2 months of hard work. We made many exceptions. We're always forgiving when the communications were delayed and there was a lot of disconnect and focusing on just completing the project. And it just ended up doing more harm than good. So being too flexible with clients, I think that really stepped over our boundaries. I think what I'm trying to say is what that really taught Armando and I was we just need to be more firm with ourselves. We need to respect our process. And this is the only way to grow as a studio, as people. And it's important to set boundaries with these clients because if we were to continue being too flexible with them, I think eventually we're going to start feeling lost about where we're headed as a studio. That's a small overview of what I mean by being too flexible with clients. Was a big failure. It's not even just about losing revenue. It's also about protecting our mental health at some point. So going through that project, I think, if anything, though, it really made us grow as business owners and people as well, because we developed thicker skin and really learned how to avoid that mistake, maybe working on our contract. We recently hired a new lawyer and we just took the necessary steps needed to avoid that from happening ever again. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
That's because I coughed and then I had to...
Okay.
Okay, wait. Backtrack. So we've got a situation where a client was asking for scope changes and you were like, yep, we can do that. And then they were like, oh, we can't get back to you this week for feedback, but we'll get back to you next week. And you're like, yep, that's okay. And then they did that multiple times, or we'll get the copy by this time, and then they didn't. And that kind of rumbled on for the project. But it sounds like you'd already set the precedent for how you were willing to let them behave. And so they just kept getting worse, like a naughty child. And then you were like, oh my God, now we need to draw the line here because this is getting insane. But you didn't quite know how to do that because it had already got so out of hand. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of a fair understanding? I mean, I've put words in your mouth here, but just so we have a little bit more color to this scene and understand a little bit about kind of how this actually played out. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. For example, we already had a feeling that we should have ended the contract 1 month into the project, but we kept going. 2 months later, we decided, okay, I think this is becoming too much now. Had a tough conversation with the client, didn't go well, and so we ended up losing a lot more than we should have. But in the end, it was just the best way to keep moving on and start accepting new work that really enjoyed us and made us enjoy what we do.
Yeah. So you were like, okay, guys, appreciate that this isn't working out. I appreciate that, can't get back to us in the necessary time we need in order to finish this project. And I understand that the scope has changed dramatically since when we first started. I think it's best that we either do this moving forward and you change your behavior and we'll do our part to make that as easy as possible, or we end the project and we hand you over to a partner that we believe would be better suited to take this project on moving forward. Was that kind of how you might have structured the conversation, or what happened?
It was a difficult conversation with the client for sure because it felt like they weren't aware of neglecting the communication issues which we had brought up. And it seemed that we were just constantly in different opinions. So the way it ended up happening was we decided, I think it's just best if we end the contract from here. We're here to support you if you need us to refer you to someone else. But even that was really hard for us to find someone who would be the right fit for this client because the people we would refer them to are our friends. And with our negative experience with this client, we also didn't know how to approach that. So it was quite challenging, really. In the end, it was very simple. We ended the contract, we parted ways, we sent all our work. They requested for a full handover of our work, and we provided them a full refund. It wasn't just the delays in communication, it was also not respecting our process. They mentioned that they actually never agreed to some of the way we structured our process, which is something that Armando and I make clear of before engaging in a project. Typically, we tell a client, these are the target dates that we are working towards. And so in the end, a lot of the truth came out between us and the client, and we understood that they had some ideas that they weren't really aligned with from the very beginning, but we weren't aware of that.
I can tell this is difficult to talk about. So thanks for sharing this story. This is clearly like still hurts a bit.
It's
But
still a little fresh, kind of. Yeah.
yeah, a little fresh. That's okay. As much as this is probably quite painful to talk about, it has no doubt tightened up your systems and processes better than any good project ever could have done. So you've taken action, you've reflected on what's happened, you've got a lawyer to restructure your contract. Maybe you're doing initial client calls better because you can see red flags. You're like, hey, guys, totally respect that you have a 10-person committee that is going to be watching our every move. That's not actually the best way we've found to work with clients. And if that doesn't suit you, that's fine. But this is how our process works. And this is how we're going to do it if we do work together. Now, if that doesn't suit, that's totally fine, committee. I'm going to point you in the direction of this agency that I think might be able to handle you better and serve you better. And it means that you're just like, you know what? This isn't worth the stress. I don't care how much money or smooth talking you've got. This is just not going to work. Is that fair to say?
1000%. I firmly believe that we came out way stronger from this project because of that experience. Not only have we been doing much better with our first calls with clients and being clear about our expectations, but now when we jump on these discovery calls, we talk about how we operate as a studio, what has worked well for us in our process, the essentially the like not exactly mentioning the mistakes, but a lot of the ways that we are able to perform at our best. And like you said, just being clear, like if that's not aligned with you, that's totally fine. But this is how we work, and embracing not to just be kind about it, just again being very straightforward with it. And that's something I feel that I am really trying to work on because it's very easy for me to be a people pleaser. And I think that's how we got ourselves into that mess too, because I was constantly saying, no, it's going to work out, it's going to work out. And you just keep going until it's too late to go back.
And at what point were you like, you know what? Okay, we need to end this. Like, how does someone who's a people pleaser who might be working with a difficult client right now, or maybe not even a difficult client, may have, okay, I think it's important to say this. Sometimes it's our lack of systems and processes that turn the clients into client zillas. It's not like they're I think too often I hear designers or developers say, they're a bad client. Maybe they're a bad fit for you. Maybe you haven't actually been managing them as well as you could have done. Maybe you've actually trained them into a little clientzilla. Maybe they're a little
Very
yappy
true.
dog now because you haven't actually set clear enough boundaries to say, stop barking while I'm talking to someone, that type of
Very
thing.
true.
And so I think that's important to say. But yeah, what advice would you give someone who may have not set clear enough boundaries throughout the process, who may have said yes to things they should have said no to, who may have accepted scope changes constantly, and is now, I've got to end this? What advice would you give them?
I don't know if this sounds silly, but simply practice how you would say it to a client. I know that's something I've been working on because personally for me, it's very hard to form those words, especially when you're in that moment. And so something that's helped me a lot is working or practicing on how I would deliver news that I think would upset a client.
Okay. Love that advice. Let's say someone's practice with a friend. Like, where do you practice that? Do you practice that in therapy? How do you even practice?
That's a good point. This is something that I've talked about with my therapist actually. But aside from my
Same
therapist
here.
and aside from my, cause yeah, for example, she would say, here's a worksheet we can work on and focusing on I instead of like you or whatever, things like that. But anyway, if it's not practicing to myself, oftentimes I actually do practice to Armando, and we often talk and have conversations about this. Anytime there's an issue that we start seeing with a client, we sit down, talk about, okay, Maria, okay, Armando, it's starting to happen again. We need to start setting clear boundaries. What should we do? And so we talk about, okay, maybe this is what we can say. And also talk about what if this client doesn't like this idea? What if they say, oh, like they come up with this excuse? So what do we say then? This is really, at least I would love to hear if there's other advice around this, but this is how we've been managing it. And at the end of the day, just setting clear expectations has been really helpful and the best we can do so that clients are aware of what they're getting before engaging even further. And we can always refer back to that as well. And I think this is why it's so important, again, to revisit like contracts if you need to. I know that some creators or independents, they feel that, oh, contracts might scare some clients, but for us, wow, our contract has saved us so many times. We were able to even call out all of the terms that this client had breached, the communication issues, the number of revisions. And at that point, we were hoping that they would see how flexible we have become despite signing this contract and reading it, or I hope they read it. But yeah, it's just referring back to those expectations.
Awesome. So it sounds like you've got kind of a role playing thing that you both do to work out what potential things they might say and how you might
Mm-hmm.
overcome that. And also having a really tight contract, which just means that you can literally refer in black and white to something that you've both agreed to. And they can't say, no, I didn't agree to that. We've signed a contract on the 12th of November, whatever. Like, you can literally be like, this is what we've agreed to. And this is the whole purpose of the contract. Like, this is literally why we have a contract, so that we can both in black and white see what our role is and what your role is. There's two things that this brings to mind though. One is something that I also learned in therapy, which was essentially how you talk about delicate things with your partner, but in this case, your client. And you could isolate whatever it is, the issue. So you say, and it's an objective thing. You're not bringing emotion into it. You're just saying, hey, I noticed that you seem to be finding it difficult to get feedback to me within 2 working days, like we agreed. Is that fair? And then they say, yeah, it's been tough. And then you say, that makes sense. Okay, so that is making me feel like this project deadline is going to be under pressure. It's making me feel a little bit worried that I'm doing a lot of work that isn't getting the feedback that I need in order to hit the deadline. So can we talk about that? And it's super neutral, because what you're doing is you're just saying, look, listen here, you piece of shit. Like, you're not saying that. And that's when things really get ugly, because what you're doing is you're doing a blame game. And it's less about blame. It's more
Exactly.
like opening up the conversation and being like, hey, let's just close the understanding gap. Like, let's just make sure that you understand where I'm coming from and I understand where you're coming from. The more you can have healthy conversations and healthy conflict, the more you can embrace conflict, the easier it's going to be to manage clients that maybe, like, you have that conversation with them and they'll be like, oh, yeah, to be honest, you're right. I haven't been getting feedback in 2 working days. I didn't realize how timely you needed my feedback, even though you said 2 working days. I just thought that was like a thing. I didn't really realize, but I'll make sure I'll change my behavior now and prioritize that so that I get feedback to you quicker. And, this whole thing in your head might be like this whole big fuck. They're going to just say that I'm a terrible person, that I'm pushing back. They're going to start an argument with me. It's probably all this like childhood trauma and stuff about answering back to your parents that you've brought into this client scenario. And it's all this weird thing with money and you're doing creative work. But actually, maybe the difference between where your head is at now and your head could be is just a conversation with your client.
Exactly. I can't attest how right that is. And really, it's just about having that open ended question or being open to talking about it. And that's something that also has helped us a lot in any, I suppose, client relationship management or conflict in the past. I would say client relationship management is such a huge skill as well. And this is people facing business, right? And which I could say is, thank goodness I work in the service industry and that was literally my job. It helped me a lot. You'd be surprised, even if you're also being open to talking to your clients and raising an issue or concerns, you also can't really exactly expect it's going to go as positively as you would hope for.
You know what, though, Maria? I think working in the service industry is the worst training you can have to be a freelancer, because the customer's always right. The customer is always, that phrase you hear your boss says to you when you're a waiter, the customers,
Yeah.
no, they're fucking not. No, they're not,
No, they're
actually.
not.
And you're not. The soup is warm. Okay. It's not cold, I'm afraid. Let me stick my pudgy finger in and taste it for you, because it's warm, the soup. It's like, I think sometimes actually you don't really learn at school or in any scenario when you're first entering the work world how to deal with conflict. How do you ask for a raise? Has there been a class at school ever
Hell
on asking
no.
for a raise? A university? I learned was Spanish verbs. It's how the fuck is that going to help me in any job? Okay, to be fair, if I went into teaching Spanish, maybe it would. But my point is that this stuff, conflict resolution and embracing conflict, it's the biggest unlocker to being, I think, being successful as a Webflower. You can learn hard skills. You're going to learn about, I don't
Easy.
know, containers and whatever, animations and 3D skill. There's plenty of courses on that stuff. I have not seen one course about how to embrace conflict as a freelancer.
You would think that I went to school for a business degree, and you would think that should be in a program like that. But no, I have not touched any courses or recall having any courses and learning about conflict resolution, which I think is such a key to just being a business owner in general. No.
Yeah, and a good partner and a good brother and a good friend. And
Yeah.
God, it's just like setting boundaries in life is the difference between you having a life that you want and having a miserable life. I find, honestly, it's just, oh man, it's the difference between being wealthy and poor. It's the difference between, it's huge. How do you determine how you want to be treated and how you want to treat other people is the crux of it, I think. And
It
yeah,
takes so much
not
time
learning
to
that skill
learn.
earlier. Yeah, it does. It does. And I'm not saying this is easy, but I do think there are like kind of structures that you can learn to think about conflict differently. And I think trying to embrace conflict, have difficult conversations as early as possible, and open up conversation rather than shut down with a triggered response of defensiveness, which I think a lot of people do.
I'm curious. So, what about you? How would you bring up this conflict with a client, and how would you rehearse that opening up a conversation? Would you also be like rehearsing this to someone, or maybe you have some challenge in bringing that up?
Yeah. Oh my God. I could write a whole book about this. Okay. One, having a therapist. I think as a man, generally, I don't think you learn to talk about feelings as much as express emotions through physical violence. The amount of times I have thumped my brother when I'm annoyed with him, or just generally, like you don't talk from a young age about how you feel necessarily.
Hmm.
And that massively determines how you behave as an adult, right? If in a group of guys, when you go and have a drink with your friends or whatever, and no one talks about how they feel, you're just talking about stuff that feels safe. I don't know if you've ever,
Right.
I don't know, been in a bunch of guys and they just have like really weird conversations where no one's actually saying anything about how they genuinely feel. It all just feels rehearsed. And I think it's because guys don't actually talk about how they feel generally. So before talking about how I'd talk about a particular case with a client, I think generally the crux of this is just learning to talk about how you feel and actually letting yourself feel different emotions, like learning to cry. And I think there's all these like stiff upper lip and, be a real man and like kind of elements of toxic
Hmm.
masculinity that I think make it actually really hard to deal with conflict in a healthy manner. And so I think first step might be to, have therapy and just get used to talk about how you feel. When you get asked, how are you? Most people are like, yeah, fine. How are you? But actually, the question, how are you? Like, how are you right now? That is actually quite an important question. And I think most people don't even give it the time of day and certainly don't ask it like they mean it. So I think that's one thing. So get used to talking about your feelings. Who do you talk to about your feelings? I think therapy has been the most amazing unlocker for me to deal with client conflict because
Same.
they're objective, they're not family members, you can be totally honest with them because they're effectively a stranger. They get to know you over time, but frankly, like they're just someone to talk to who actually has trained to ask intelligent questions. You're paying to listen to you as well. Like not everyone wants to listen to your shit. Like you need
That
like
too.
putting that on your partner can sometimes probably put a lot of pressure on your relationship.
Yeah.
Like they're not your therapist. Like your brother isn't your therapist. Like pay someone to listen to you. It sounds a bit weird, but actually I think it's like the most logical thing to do. Like I've had to break up with friends because they just offload to me the whole time. And I'm like, this isn't a friendship.
It's
Like I'm not your
exhausting.
therapist. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is how would I deal with this scenario? One, get used to talking about feelings. Two, have a therapist that you can actually role play this with, like you did. I think that's so healthy. And then third thing I think is learning how to structure conflict and have healthy conflict resolution. So talking objectively about the thing that they've done or that you have both witnessed and felt, and then talk about how that's affected you and how you can overcome that barrier, I think is a really healthy, like structural mental framework. And then I think the other thing to do as well is to learn what triggers you. I think that happens in therapy. Like,
Hmm.
someone might say something and you might turn into a bulldog. And it's like, actually, where's that coming from? Like, is this, are you looking at this client as if they're like a family member who doesn't know what they're talking about and they might tell you how they think it should be, but actually they don't know anything about what they're talking about. But maybe you're looking at them as if they're someone in your life or someone in the past that has like really made you feel a certain way and you need to
Yeah.
work through that.
Oh, sorry. I
Yeah.
love that you said that because one of the things I talked about with my therapist was sometimes it's also one of the mistakes and failures, I suppose, tying into being flexible. And that's allowing my emotions to get in the way. So I tend to be too empathetic sometimes, especially let's say if it was any excuse essentially. That's why I always tend to be like, hey, I understand constantly. But of course, again, that's not me setting boundaries. And so it's something my therapist has told me like, oh, in business, do not ever, never let your emotions guide you. And that's like the worst thing you can do. And she's right, because again,
Mm.
that's just allowing the client to, again, control the situation, and again, allowing me to have no boundaries in that sense.
I mean, I think this whole like don't show emotion thing, let me say that again. This idea of not letting emotions guide your decision making, I think that can be problematic because sometimes what I found is showing my vulnerability to my client and being like, hey, I'm really sorry, but this thing you did made me feel, or like this, not thing you did, this, sometimes I find that you don't get back to me in over a week and we've got this deadline. This is making me a little bit nervous because I feel like I'm working a lot on this project, not necessarily getting the same amount of feedback that I need in order to, move this project along. It's making me feel quite nervous that we're not going to get it done in time. Can we just talk about that? And then they say, you know what? I'm actually going through a divorce right now, to be honest. And life is really difficult. And it's not a reflection on the quality of your work. It's just at my end, I'm getting punched in the face by life. And I don't really know how this is all working. But I'm not actually going to get feedback to you in 2 days. In fact, I think maybe, you know, we should pause this project. And it's, oh my God, what a head flip, right? You've got this like, you're
Right?
sitting there at your laptop, like, where the fuck is this feedback? I've got 3 other clients that are hounding me for work that I can't get on with unless I get this job done. They're not
Exactly.
getting me. And actually, someone's going through a massive life transition and it completely flips your perspective on it to actually understand where they're coming from. And the difference is if you just went in and you were like, listen, you haven't replied to me in 7 working days, you're fired as a client. I'm going to pass you on to someone else. You just shut that door because you're just triggered by it. And you're just like, you know what? Fuck this person. You might have shut a door that could have been left open and just let's just clear the air. Let's just talk about this. Let's just step into the same headspace for a bit. Amazing things can happen. And I've some of my
Yeah.
longest term clients have been people that I honestly couldn't stand when I first did a project with them. And then we had a conversation, we understood each other, and was like, actually, they're just struggling with life at the moment, and they're not actually clientzilla. I've just not understood them, you know?
That's, you would think that a lot of the things you practice in life can really translate into business as well. And the sad thing is sometimes even no matter how open you are to having that conversation, and you're also being empathetic, okay, you just share that you're going through a divorce and you go, hey, I understand, thank you for sharing that with me. There unfortunately still are some people maybe in your life or in business, clients in general, that still disregard that you've already done so much that you could. And that's where you still have to draw the line. You know what? I think I understood that this is now a mismatch. And unfortunately, that's how it's come to this point, which again, it's fine. Sometimes it's, as much as you try to pre qualify a really great client in the beginning, like I said earlier, it's not always going to go as planned, but it's fine. You move on, you learn from it, and you grow.
Yeah, of course. And different energies clash at times, and there's all sorts of things going on in people's lives that you don't understand. Maybe they are just very difficult people, and that is potentially a reality. But I think that's a lot less of the cases than is actually, represented when I talk to other designers and developers. They're like, my client, what an idiot. Or they say something like that. And I'm like, instantly, I'm like, how you're
It's
talking
very
about them
true.
to me suggests that actually maybe you're the idiot. But anyway, yeah, it's
It's very
complicated, isn't it?
true. And exactly. And I think that's why I felt so sad about ending that relationship, because our relationship was really great in the beginning. And so even though that was a hard lesson learned, it also told me that it's also not on them. I would never want to blame a client or say they were a terrible client. It has something maybe to do that we need to fix from our end. Maybe we weren't as clear as possible. Maybe we should have been more honest a lot sooner. And again, that's something that often Armando and I talk about too, is look, I think we're in this mess because we weren't honest that soon and we kept saying things are okay, and now it's too late. So it's not about the client being an idiot or we're disregarding our feelings and whatnot. It's about, again, us. Now we're in this mess. We recognize it. We're learning from it. And now we know that for future projects, we need to have this conversation early on to avoid this from happening again.
Beautiful. Sounds like you've reflected on it. You understand your part in it. You understand their part in it. And it sounds like a healthy thing to, in the end, part ways. Are you ready for the most difficult question I'm going to ask you this whole podcast, Maria?
Let's go for it.
What is your next failure going to be?
This is a really great question. I feel like there's so many to think about. Can I say, I would say the next biggest failure will be regretting that. I don't know. I really have to think about this. Thank goodness you're editing this.
We're going to edit this. Do not fear.
I don't know. I have to really think about this because I think maybe it stems from fear. Let's start with that. So I fear that I'm going to change something in the business and it's going to not go well, and it will be hard to bounce back from that. I think it sounds very vague, but I think it's because I'm scared of change. And as much as change is also exciting and that's necessary for growth, I think my next biggest failure would be not going through that change sooner. I don't know what exactly that would be yet, but
to be fair, how are you going to know what your next failure is going to be? Because likely it is, you probably want to avoid it, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger and all that jazz. I'm sure that you will deal with it though, because like you said at the start of this podcast episode, failure is like water off a duck's back with you. You're just like, you know what? I'm going to get punched in the face. I'm going to get up and keep moving. And I think to never want to fail is a recipe for having a very boring life. So
that's true.
My 2 cents on the matter. I don't know if that's true. That's just my take right now in this period of life that I'm in. Maria, thanks so much for coming on Webflow. You have been an absolutely astounding guest.
Thanks for having me, Jack. This was really fun. I'm really sad that you're ending Webflail, but who knows? Like I said, who knows if Webflail will be back? But regardless, I'm super excited to see what you'll be up to next.
Plenty more to come. Webflail, the essence of Webflail is not necessarily leaving, in the sense that I want to do more interviews with people. I want to do a lot more sharing of content. I want to do a lot more asking of awkward questions to people. But yeah, just maybe a slightly different format. We shall see. But
yeah, that's the only way to go. You'll never have the right answer unless you try, right?
Hey, keep on flailing, web flailers, as they say. But yeah, thanks so much, Maria, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Jack.
And that's a wrap. So, what an episode. Thanks so much to Maria for coming on the podcast. Thanks so much to you lot for listening. Now, as you know, I like to say one big takeaway at the end of the episodes. And for this one, what I want to talk about is the importance of setting boundaries. I used to think that saying no was bad, just generally bad. Like, you're not really expected as a child to say no, I find, or I found. And so I think you have this idea that you want your parents for you to be acquiescent, to accept what they want you to do. So you'll get used to saying yes. And I think you kind of assimilate this idea that you're not really meant to say no because you don't want to disappoint your parents. And I think there's this funny thing that happens when you have clients where you need to actually say no in order to protect yourself, but also sometimes protect them from making decisions that you don't think are actually in line with what their expected outcomes are. And Maria talks about this misalignment of expectations from the get-go with a particular client led to huge stress and burnout. And when you get on a path of basically saying yes to a client from the get-go, yes, I'll reduce my rates. Yes, we can do it as quickly as you want us to. Yes, we can get that done. Yes, we can change this. Yes, we can change that. You actually become subservient to the client. The client doesn't look at you as the expert. They kind of look at you as their little bitch, in my experience. Not Maria's words, but this is what I have personally found, and maybe Maria can resonate with. So essentially, prioritizing clear communication. Everyone talks about clear communication, but what does clear communication actually look like? For me, clear communication is saying what both parties' expectations are in open dialogue. And that is including pushing back when you need to and saying, actually, we're not going to be able to get this done in 3 weeks to the standard that you expect. So is there any reason why you're expecting this to be done so quickly? If not, is there leeway in the timeline? Because we're going to need more time than what you're expecting us to be able to do it in order to actually achieve the outcomes that you want. And do you see how that type of framing is actually really powerful to say, no, but here's an alternative, or here's an explanation, and here's an alternative. And I think that type of healthy, open dialogue can prevent so many problems. So many problems. I've had so many problems with clients because I have not been clear enough about what I'm able to do, what I expect of them, how those expectations align. And essentially, if you can close the gap between someone else's perceived expectation of reality and your own perceived expectation of reality, then there's some kind of understanding that can happen. And generally, I find people get less pissed off than they would going through a client project. So, try and foster healthy, productive partnerships with your clients, because you don't want to be combative. You don't want to get into a game of he said, she said. That's not fun for anyone. So, how are you going to prevent that? Make sure that you are clear about what is possible, what's not possible, what you are willing to do, what you're not willing to do, and just be clear explaining why that is in order to ensure that you reduce the amount of stress that a project might be otherwise. Hope that was helpful, guys. Stay classy, San Diego. No, keep on flailing web flailers.